Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Pension Funding Policy Development After COVID-19 webinar presented by GovInvest. The COVID-19 pandemic was largely unforeseen, but one effect was predictable, and that an economic shock would push a number of state and local pension plans to dangerously low funding levels, requiring more government resources at a time when cities and counties can ill afford it. So in this facilitated conversation between retired city manager, seasoned local government finance director, and a current deputy city manager, we're going to explore how a local government proposes a way forward by developing and implementing pension funding policies for local governments to bring risk management in line with the realities of public sector pension plans, to improve fiscal stability, and to increase accountability and transparency. Let's get started. And first, some housekeeping. We will send out a recording as well as a copy of the slide deck after the conclusion of the webinar. And if you have any questions after the webinar, please reach out to Max at govinvest.com. His contact information will be presented again at the end of the webinar, as well as the panelists. But if you have a question during the webinar, please use the chat box, and we will try to answer as we are presenting. We all have been on Zoom meetings a lot. I'm sure that you're all familiar with how to use that chat box on the bottom of your screen. We want this to be interactive, so we're going to also be using Poll Everywhere. Poll Everywhere isn't as easy to use as Zoom, but there are some instructions, and we want to pause for 30 seconds now to give everyone time to pull out your cell phones or go to your desktop and to join Poll Everywhere, because we're going to be asking you today to provide us input to the content of the webinar. So it's pretty easy. If you're on your cell phone, just pick it up, put in the number 22333, and in the text box, put in Charles Frank 424. That'll activate the poll, and then when we get ready, all you'll have to do is text in your message. If you're going to be using your desktop, go to pollev.com. Again, when it prompts you for a name, put in Charles Frank, F-R-A-N-C 424, and then you'll be ready to respond to activity. Okay, I hope everyone's in there by now. We really want your participation. Thank you. Let's introduce ourselves. Kevin, let's start it with you. Tell us about yourself, your career, and what you're doing now.
Thank you, Charlie. You know, city managers are very shy about sharing stories about themselves, but I promise to keep this short. I have 30 plus years as a city manager here in California, having managed the cities of Stanton and Buena Park in Orange County and the city of Fairfield up here in the San Francisco Bay Area. And then later, in my encore performance, I've served as an interim city manager in Stockton, Woodland, and Santa Ana. And while managing those cities, I've managed that through earthquakes, floods, civil unrest, the Orange County bankruptcy, and a couple of recessions. So I think I have some experience to share as we try to talk about grappling with financial realities in light of the pandemic, the financial crisis, and the current civil unrest. So that's it.
Oh, thank you, Kevin. It's a privilege to have you on our webinar today. You've sure been through a lot of crisis, so we're looking forward to your input. And Stuart, now it's your turn. Please introduce yourself, your background, and your current position and role with the City of Brisbane.
Sure. So my current position with the City of Brisbane is Administrative Services Director, Deputy City Manager. So I'm in charge of finance, HR, IT, communications, parks and recreation, and anything else that my boss doesn't want to do. I got my start in Arizona. I spent a year in Arizona. Then I moved to Southern California in Encinitas as a startup city, which was really a fun experience. And then I moved to budget manager in Reno, Nevada, and then over here to Brisbane. So I have experience in different cities with different kinds of financial issues that everybody faces. I've worked through, as Kevin has, worked through a number of recessions that we had to deal with, different kinds of emergencies. So this is just one more emergency that we have to deal with and get through, and we know we will.
Oh, great. Thank you. I'm just honored to be facilitating this program with you today, and I'm looking forward to your insights as well. And men and women, my name is Charlie Francis. I'm a retired city finance director following a 45-year career, all in government finance, either as a finance director or as a consultant to finance directors. And now that I'm retired, I still do some work. I'm a senior director with GovInvest, and I will be your talk show host today as Kevin and Stuart discuss pension funding policy development during these difficult financial times. Specifically, I'm going to be moderating a discussion between Kevin and Stuart by asking them these questions on the slide. Like, how does a city manager and CFO talk to each other when they're experiencing these revenue losses and expenditure spikes when you're going through recessions, when you're going through civil unrest? And then specifically, what actions are you looking at in preparing next year's budget? What are you doing about pension costs in the long term? And since pension costs are your second largest element of compensation, how do you go about preparing for and tools to measure what those are going to be in the future? And then how would you go about developing a pension funding policy? Now, many of our discussion today is going to be California centric. We're all California people. Many on the webinar are from California. California has an agent multiple employer plan. It's where the assets are pooled for investment purposes, but their separate accounts are maintained for each individual employer. But some of the ideas that we're going to be talking about today can be for other types of multi-employer plans as well as standalone pension plans. So please stay focused. We'll cover something for everyone here. And then I'll close the webinar with a discussion and recommendation on developing a specific funding policy for each of your agencies. And like I mentioned earlier, we want your input also. So on this next slide, I will be asking you to let us know what you're expecting out of today's discussion. Or maybe I should say, what additional questions should we cover during this webinar? So let me go and get 30 seconds here. Go ahead, and this is free form, either by texting on your cell phone or by going to the desktop app and testing in some other questions, what you're expecting to get out of this webinar here today. Looks like we have a little bit of difficulty getting this going, but we have how many found their funding policy was adequate to handle the 2008-9 market losses? I'll be able to talk to that. How many systems already have a written funding policy? We have a couple of examples. That's a good one. Okay, other webinar participants looking for your input here. Hopefully you're all having success at using Pull Everywhere. General idea of what other cities are doing to deal with funding, okay? I know when you're doing a webinar, the pausing and waiting for input seems like an eternity. So I'm going to give this 10 more seconds.
And Charlie, there's one on the chat that says, how do you explain a funding policy to council?
Oh, great question. Okay, we'll make sure we cover that one too. Max, if you're able to, maybe you could type that in to Pull Everywhere if you have that up.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. How to fund when we have no reserves and deficit budgets? Oh, there's a great question. Ideas for funding policy and how to communicate it. Okay, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And the last one that came in, and our other cities looking at cost sharing as concessions. Okay. Let's make sure we cover that as well. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now and bring up Kevin and Stuart. Hopefully everyone can see it. Talking heads up here, and let's start with this first one. How do you see your role, Stuart, as a CFO? You're going to sit down with the city manager and you're going to say, "Hey, city manager, I think we have a problem with this current crisis." What's that discussion going to be like?
Well, I think the conversations really have started years before, when we've been having conversations about where we are and where we're going in the future. But the current one, my conversation with my city manager was, it looks like we're going to be down about 10%, 20% of our budget. So we need to start thinking through what that's going to look like for us and how we're going to start saving money. And then when it comes to the pension, when I looked at it at the beginning of March, or this was happening, I was thinking, oh my God, we're going to probably see about a 8 to 10% loss in PERS this year, and that's going to have a huge impact on us. And talking to my city manager, part of it was, let's wait to see what the real information is. Let's not try and base our decisions on incomplete information. And that would be part of what my conversation with my city manager would be, is, give me a little bit more time. We're just at the beginning of this crisis. Let's really figure out what the problem is. And then Kevin would probably ask me a slew of questions after that.
Yes, I would.
And what would those be, Kevin?
Well, before getting into that, I'm not sure who exactly is, participating in the webinar, but for CEOs or city managers, I would suggest that success in this process, Stuart and I have talked about this before, really depends upon the level of trust that exists between the CEO and the CFO. And hopefully you've been able to build that up, because it's also going to reflect itself in your relationship back with the elected officials. And I think trying to keep everybody focused, from the members of the organization, as I sit in different online meetings, if you will, with staff in different cities, staff are truly distracted with the pandemic and all the new responsibilities that have been, coming at them. So I think key is for the CFO and the CEO to get first the organization, keep them settled down, keep them focused on trying to make sensible and informed recommendations to the elected officials, so they can make good decisions. And if the staff's distracted, you can imagine how distracted the council members and mayors probably are as well, in terms of the amount of new demands on them, et cetera. So I think key to this is, again, building a pattern of trust, and then being able to bring forward sensible recommendations to your city council. I don't know if that.
Oh, that really helps, Kevin. And I'm just curious, though, at the same time that you and Stuart are talking with each other, saying, well, we have to remain calm and we're, monitor the situation closely, you may have some city council members that could be panicking. How do you manage your council members during this time?
Well, I think the city manager has to learn the art form of talking elected officials in off the ledge. And because, you're always going to have that council member whose hair is on fire, who are going to panic. But hopefully you've got a good core group of council members who get it, and they can stay focused. Again, it's never, in my mind, counting to the majority. It's always counting to the whole. So you have 5 or 7 or 9 members, on your city council. It is trying to keep a unified direction. And so I would actually look from assistance from my other members of the council to assist with that. Let's say that member, Charlie, that you're talking about, that's maybe going off the reservation, if you would, on the issues.
Okay. So, Stuart,
Kevin, let me just ask Kevin a question, because part of that is also the communication you've had leading up to that, and the communications that the trust that staff has built with council over the years is part of what I've always done.
Exactly. I can remember a flood in Buena Park, and we just had an election. So I had a new council member. The other 4 had worked together for a number of years with me and with the staff, and were fully able to accept my decision as the emergency management guy in charge of the event. But having to get that 5th member of the council on board was interesting, and a learning process. So sometimes you just got to do it when it happens. You can prepare as much as you want, but you have to get ready to address that when that member becomes an issue.
So Stuart and Kevin, did either of you in your careers or in your current positions have like a city council finance committee, or maybe 2 members of the city council are on a finance committee with the city manager and the finance director, and they had regular meetings?
Well, my experience, my three cities, we didn't have a independent finance committee. I've dealt with as a consultant, particularly with PARs. I'm meeting with finance committees all over at least all over the state, and so I've gotten accustomed to dealing with them. But the finance, I always, in the three cities where I was the full-time city manager, the city council they either trusted each other so completely that they entrusted the staff to bring it forward to the group as a whole, or they didn't trust us or themselves, and they needed to have a workshop with everybody present. So it really depended.
Okay.
So in Brisbane, we've actually had a finance committee, but they actually stopped meeting. And I think that part of it is what Kevin was talking about, was building that trust. There was a new council member who really wanted to get a more in-depth understanding of the budget. So what we said is, okay, let's go through a subcommittee, because that way we can spend a lot more time delving into the details of it. And after a couple of years, that committee didn't really have anything else to meet about, because the council members who really were curious understood it. When I was in Brisbane, though, we had an outside finance committee from residents.
Oh.
And that was different, because what you do is you get a number of people who have experience in finance in the private sector, who are trying to put that experience from the private sector into the public sector. And there are differences there, and trying to explain the differences between public sector and private sector finance is always a challenge.
Yeah, so when I was in Sausalito, the last city I worked before I retired, we had a regular standing city council appointed finance committee. It had 2 council members, city manager and myself, and they met on a monthly basis. So we all did, and we went through sort of like a strategic analysis of where we were, current year budget to actual, and then extrapolated that into how does this fit into our 5-year financial plan. So in other words, we were always saying, here's the current situation. Is that consistent with our 5-year plan? So they were always informed. And then it was up to them to report to the city council on a monthly basis of where they were in terms of financial condition. And so that was how City of Sausalito handled, keeping the council informed. So let's move on to another question then. Now, most of us that are on a June 30 fiscal year probably have already prepared next year's budget. So what kind of action items, Stuart, do you have in your next year's budget to monitor this crisis and to be able to respond or react to as the economic conditions change?
Well, the first thing that we did is when we adopted the budget, I went through with the city council what my revenue projections were. And I told them very upfront, here are the items where I think I might be budgeting a little bit more conservatively, and here's some of the items where I think might be a little bit more aggressive. For property tax for us, I think we're going to get more than I budgeted, because we've got a lot of development in town that's coming online. But we also have 2 hotels which produce about 15% of our overall budget, and I reduced their number by 50%. And I told city council, based on what we saw coming in March, that 50% reduction may not be enough, and that we will review that every month. And during the last recession, what I did is every month I put together a memo for the city council saying, here's where our revenues are, here's where our expenditures are, here's what the analysis is versus what we thought was going to happen in the budget. And I provided that to the city council every month, so that way they were informed as a whole, as opposed to what you did in Sausalito with doing it through a couple.
Okay.
So I think that we're going to do, and I told council we're going to do that. We're going to get back to that same format, because we are in an uncertain time, and when uncertain times happen, as you get more information, you can make better decisions.
Right. And Kevin, what advice would you be giving your finance director as you move forward in preparing the next year's budget?
Well, if in listening to Stuart, I noted down a couple of things. The idea of a regular communication system with the city council. That's one of the things that I would say is really critical. And as Stuart has said, and I've heard from managers across the state, this thing is still unfolding. And so what we thought was the case back in March, for example, it may not, and certainly is not the case today in June. So I think the smart way to approach this is to say, we're going to adopt a budget, but to a great extent, we may revisit this, not just during a mid-year budget review, but we might revisit this several times through the budget year. If Stuart was my finance director and I was the city manager of a tourist city like Buena Park or Santa Monica or Anaheim or San Diego, I would be very concerned because, you know, the first quarter and second quarter tax results for TOT, parking fees, and sales tax, of course, have been extremely dismal. So again, I think the response back, this is not a one size fits all. It depends upon where your revenues are coming from and how impacted due to these experiences your revenue base is. And then that should dictate exactly how much care and feeding and handholding both of the community, the organization, as well as your city council demands.
Yeah, so when your budget is primarily based on the more elastic revenues like sales tax and hotel taxes, what are some of the first services that are going to be cut?
Stuart, you want to go? Or you want me to go? I mean,
well, this becomes an interesting question because the conversation we have with our city council is not so much what services are we going to cut, but what services do you want provided? And we as, you know, you tell us what you want to provide, and we as staff will come back and let you know what that will look like given the revenues that we have. You know, part of it also is the conversations that you have with city council, you know, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, about how do you build up reserves for this? And, you know, as the city of Brisbane, one of the things that I took forward to the city council after the last recession was putting into place a recession reserve, putting into place an emergency reserve. So that way, a lot of cities have reserve policies where they say we want to keep 25% of our revenues in reserve, but they never talk about when do you spend that 25%? So what we talked about was when do we spend down our reserves in order to provide us time to make long-term good decisions. And, you know, so if council tells us that we want to have these services, we can say we can provide those. We're going to eat into our reserves, and, you know, maybe in a year and a half, the financial situation will be different, and we can have a different conversation. So that to me is part of it, is knowing what people want as so much as saying, here's what we're going to cut. The easy solution, what we did is we froze all the open positions. In the city at the moment, the only open positions we have is in the police department. So we have actually 3 frozen police officer positions in our department, in our city right now.
Okay.
So my response would be, it really depends upon the financial condition of the city. And I think as everybody that's participating in these conversations are hearing, many, if not most cities across California, probably in many parts of the United States, were best positioned to face this financial crisis because of their reserves that they had built up just as a result of the economy. So I think, again, the urgency of how you'll reduce or change your structure of your budget really, again, depends upon what your particular financial condition is. Hopefully, you know, you work with your mayor and city council and you've developed a set of priorities. And I think certainly you would go back during, you know, the early budget workshops, which hopefully, you know, they're probably still going on. You know, you'd like to think an early budget workshop happened in February or March, but probably not this year, not effectively. So, you know, revisit those priorities and say, okay, so, you know, PD was and fire were a big priority. So are they still, and how do we fund those as opposed to other things? If, you know, if you have general fund activities and you're an entertainment city and for some reason you're funding that out of the general fund, you know, is that a place? Because, you know, the people aren't coming to the beach this year, or, you know, that sort of thing. So again, I think it's a situational thing depending upon the city's budget condition. the priority setting that's been done and that's recent and in the eyes and the minds of the community and the council. And if it's not, get to it right away so that you're not just cutting.
Right, Kevin, so one of the frustrations as the finance person is always that the budget doesn't seem to have a lot of priority for the city council. It's not their big issue, that they spend time on it, but they really don't spend the time really looking at it as a policy document, and they look at it as a numbers document. And I think that might be part of it because of what we do. And you don't really get clear policy direction from council. As the finance director, how do I help the city manager really get council to focus on the policy issues in a budget as opposed to the number issues in the budget?
Well, again, for me, at least, Stuart, depending upon the dynamics of the city council, if they're a city council has been together for quite a while, and like you were saying earlier, they have a huge amount of trust in you and staff, that would, then obviously that's not a problem. But I think spending time with the city council and getting them to define, what they think the priorities are for their community is pretty key. And hopefully getting them to the point to understand that the budget document is a reflection of their policy statement of who they are and what they want and what they see happening. So, the budget may be those boring numbers for some members of the community, et cetera, but they are central to delivering on the services that the council has set through the priority.
So Stuart, at the same time as you're trying to get the councils to say, here's a policy document, here's the priorities for this next year. In other words, we're focusing on the budget. You also are looking at the long term, and when we are looking at the long term, we're seeing that more than likely CalPERS is not, and other pension funds are not going to be making their assumed rate of return on their investments, and which could have a big impact on UAL and our costs. So what are you anticipating in your budget looking long term with pension funding and payments?
So I've already talked to council about that during the budget hearings this year. And what I gave them was a scenario saying for every 1% loss or 1% below the 7% that PERS is going to get, we're going to need to spend $86,000 more in a year going forward. So if PERS breaks even for the year and they go to zero, that's $500,000 more for us. And that's on a $20 million general fund budget. And I know $500,000 for a lot of cities doesn't seem like a lot, but for us, that could be significant. So what I told council is that as we come out of this recession, what we need to start doing is not just budget for what we're planning for today, but we need to start putting money aside for the future. And that just because we get to the point where maybe our revenues and our expenditures for this year break even, it doesn't mean that they're break even in 5 years. And we need to plan for that 5-year break even point, not today's break even point. And so we need to more than overcompensate for our revenues than just break even in revenues. So we've already started that conversation.
So Kevin, when city councils then are answering this question, so what services are we going to be providing? Should they be looking at crowding out services today in order to meet those pension obligations that are coming tomorrow? In other words, maybe even cutting back more positions out of today's budget in order to accumulate surpluses for tomorrow's budget.
Well, before PEPRA came along here in California, that was because it relates to a tool that many cities and counties and districts were using to make reductions by creating incentives for early retirement, those sorts of things. PEPRA basically restricted, and there's also some IRS issues apparently now that are out there. So unless you have an existing plan to address some of those things, it becomes much more difficult for you to use those tools that we've always used in the past. Because what you want to try to do is, obviously, if you're needing to make decisions to emphasize certain services over others, that means you need to possibly have people leave the organization. You certainly want to do that in the most compassionate and gentle way that you can. So I'm not sure exactly how cities will address that in this particular go around, since a lot of those tools are not available to them right now.
Right. I guess specifically, maybe we have to have a smaller workforce today, even though we have enough revenues to have a bigger workforce in order to set aside money for tomorrow's UAL payments. Is that a hard political sell?
If you're talking about, the services like police and fire, the very visible things that people see, even public works, the maintenance of their streets, the services they provide through community services or recreation. Yeah, I think that becomes a very difficult sell. Yeah.
I think part of what the finance director can do to help through that process, though, is provide a full cost of service for the city manager and for the city council, because the cost of service isn't just what you're spending on somebody today. It's what you're going to be spending on that person over their lifetime. So one of the things that you can do in order to try and work through some of that is to say that we know we're going to have an increase in our UAL, which means that the cost of service today is actually higher than just what we're paying in salary. So if we're able to work through with the city manager, create an ability to say, here's what the full cost of providing the service is, that may be an easier way to explain what is happening, as opposed to just saying on a pay-as-you-go basis. I don't know what your thoughts on that one are, Kevin.
I'm not sure whether they have, I'm just trying to picture the city council I had and trying to get them to those positions. So I don't have a good answer.
All right. So this is kind of interesting. Pension costs are the second largest cost element of compensation, and we know that more than likely by June 30th, for those of us in California, the CalPERS probably will not meet their discount rate, assumed rate of return. So what tools are you using today to calculate what the increase in UAL and amortization payments are going to be, and what tools are you using to prepare for that? Stuart?
We actually have the GovInvest software. So I have been plugging different numbers into GovInvest software to figure out if the rate of return is 0, if it's -5, if it's 6%, whatever it is, to have an idea of what that cost is going to be over the 5-year period. So that's what I'm using to figure out what that cost is going forward. It's I mean, for me, it's really easy. And I know that's a plug for the company, but it is a very simple way for me to do it.
Yeah, and we did a webinar not too long ago about stress testing pensions during these COVID-19 times, and I just like to refer the audience back to that webinar. That it's available. You could send an email to Maxon at govinvest.com, and he'd be able to help with that. Kevin, how receptive are city councils to fact-based and evidence like would come out of the GovInvest tools? Is it scary? They might say, well, we don't like that scenario, run this scenario, or are they pretty comfortable with looking at the finance director, the city manager's advice and running scenarios on their own in the software?
I think, again, depends upon the city council or the member of the city council and their relationship with the finance director and the city manager. It would be, my experience has been, I've been able to build up a level of trust where if I come in with the finance director, we present, let's say, the latest numbers, from what we inputted through the GovInvest app, and come back and say, here's what we see, and here's what we see happening over the next, 6 or 12 months, that they would be accepting of that. The problem becomes, of course, is that if it's really harsh, and I'm sure stewards have the same experience, there's sometimes you've got some really harsh messages to bring forward, and city councils are just going to push back because they personally don't see it, or they fear that their constituents will be just appalled by what you're coming up as being the needed to be done. So
Okay,
Yeah,
great.
and that's true. And I think the best thing you can do at that point is just to provide as much information as you can. One of my, I did the same thing a couple of years ago about being able to put money aside into our 457 plan or a 115 plan in order to, smooth out our payments going over time. And one of the council members came back and said, I want to run different scenarios. And in a meeting with him and myself, we sat down with the GovInvest software and we ran 5 different scenarios that he asked me to run. And what you really find when you start running those scenarios is it doesn't really change the long term very much. If you're saying, if you're going to say, oh, let's pretend that person is going to do 8% a year versus 7, it doesn't really going to make much of a difference in that long term 5 to 10 year time period. And so I think building that level, as Kevin says, building that level of trust where you go in there, you can have that conversation with the council members. And a lot of the conversations aren't at the council meeting. I mean, this is part of what you see as well, is that a lot of people, when they're coming into the cities, think that the conversations at the council meeting is the only conversation you've had with the council members. And a lot of times you've had conversations with the council members even in the hallway talking about what's going on. And that builds a level of trust with the council member that they would not normally have just from what they see at the council meeting.
Always being careful never to violate the Brown Act, though.
That's for sure.
Only one council member at a time, as we say.
That's right. And not counting votes, right? So
I've never counted a vote in my life.
there you go.
Okay.
There's,
I'm often surprised when I do, because I don't usually vote the way they tell me publicly.
So Stuart mentioned the 115 trust, and at some point, maybe a little bit later, I can, through working with PARS, we work with cities to develop funding policies for their 115 trusts. So therefore, for addressing their liabilities, and it's fascinating to see how many different approaches there are based upon how many different financial realities exist in the different cities. So,
well, Kevin, that's kind of a good way just to let's just jump to your part, the next part of the presentation, and just kind of go out of order of what we were planning. What are some of those funding? I'm going to share my screen and put it in here. What are some of those funding options available to cities? Some of those tools.
Well, as everybody can see on the screen, that up until it says previously, I was thinking, I think it's about 5 to 6 years now, but before that, the only way to reduce your retirement system unfunded liability with CalPERS was to send additional contributions in excess of your annual required contribution to the pension system. And a lot of cities were not feeling good about that because they felt like it was going into the black box someplace, and that they were losing control over those additional funds. So an alternative to sending more money then to the retirement system has been the development of locally controlled Section 115 trusts, which first came about for OPEB, for your retiree medical, and then about 5 or 6 years ago was extended to pension. So you're able to set up a retirement trust separate and apart from the retirement system, where you're able to actually, in essence, build up a reserve, if you would, for the payment of pension-related costs. And there is a PARS, for example, and other firms have received an IRS private letter ruling affirming that the tax-exempt status of the program. So that's sometimes a question I think that cities have. And we estimate amongst all those that provide this 115 trust that there's probably 250 California agencies, of that about 125 cities that have adopted the program, with others considering adoption. And beyond California, we have OPEB and pension 115 trusts being adopted in the Northeast, Texas, Florida, so outside of California. So if you go to the next slide. So as you can see, the 115 trust can be used by local governments to fund essential government functions, retiree healthcare, blah, blah, pension, etc. Trust is irrevocable and designed to pre-fund retirement plan obligations. I don't need to go through all the bullets, but key here is the next one is assets are considered restricted assets. They're available for use to reduce the city's net pension liability. So, and then once you got the money in the trust, they can only be used for retirement plan costs. So like, again, reimbursing the agency for retirement system costs, transferring money again to the retirement system, or even paying things like your actuarial report and audits, et cetera. During a financial crisis, the benefit of having money in the 115 trust is that you can take the money out and apply it to your current year pension cost. And if you have an OPEB account, similarly with your retiree medical costs, thereby freeing up your general fund demands in that particular financially critical year. So I think that's something that's pretty important. And that's it. Unless Stuart wants to. Stuart, I think you have 115 trusts, right? So do you want to talk about that?
We have both a OPEB and a pension 115 trust. And what we're doing with our pension 115 trust is we're going to try and fund it to the point where we can pay for 2 years of unfunded liability. So as opposed to trying to pay down our entire debt or anything, what we're saying is, like, we recognize that there's going to be a recession, there's going to be downturns in the economy, that we're going to need to pull from the 115 trust to pay for unfunded liability. So as you say, there's a lot of different ways that you can use your 115 trust. You don't have to fund it to the full extent of your PERS liability to really provide a cushion for the city budget in any given year. And then hopefully, if we can continue to pay our unfunded liability straight out, at some point we could just use it to pay the regular, as you said, Kevin, just the regular payment. So it's not lost money. It doesn't stop getting used.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
It's an irrevocable. I was just going to say it's an irrevocable trust, but you have control over it, and you can you take money out if you need it for pension or, like we said, OPEB related costs. So, yep.
Right, and as you said, it's for any pension cost. It's even for your normal payment for PERS, not just your unfunded liability. So even if you pay down for full unfunded liability and you hit a recession, you might say, okay, this is the year I don't want to I want to save money by not making my PERS payment and pay for that out of the 115 trust.
Right.
So it's very, very flexible instrument is what we found, and we're very happy with it.
Great. And I think, Charlie, it goes back to what Stu and I are talking about is, there was an earlier question about establishing a pension funding policy. Well, part of the discipline of adopting a 115 trust is there is an expectation in order to offer guidance to your investment folks that are handling that they things are popping up here, that you adopt a funding policy. And there are dozens, if not more, samples or examples of funding policies. So, for example, maybe I won't mention the cities, but let me just read you a couple of that different cities have selected. They contributes 50% of a given year's realized year-end surplus to address pension liability. Another contributes $4 million to stabilize the PERS employer miscellaneous rates to 28% and safety rates to 44% through fiscal year 23-24. Again, just skipping around here. Earmarked a portion of a recently approved local sales tax measure to be set aside for unfunded pension liabilities. And then lastly, using a one-time revenue source and lowering the minimum general fund reserve level from 30% to 20%. These are just examples. And I would guess, and I would bet that under the our new financial realities, that these funding policies I just mentioned and the others that are adopted will probably be addressed and changed to meet new circumstances.
Okay, great.
And the nice thing about those, Kevin, is when you have them and you're at the table with the bargaining groups, because that obviously is the other issue that's out there for everybody, is if you can explain, here's what we're trying to do through the 115 trust. We want to make sure that when issues happen in the future, we're not laying people off, we're not doing pay cuts, that we're able to have money set aside for particular problems. I have found that to be very effective in dealing with bargaining groups as to when there is extra money in one year, when they say, oh, why don't we get an extra 2% this year? We can say, well, the reason you're not getting an extra 2% is to ensure your ongoing employment in the future. And that seems to be, at least for me, that has been effective. Not this year, but also.
Absolutely. I see a number of agencies it's kind of like a twofer with employee groups, which is to say just what you said, that it's helping to protect their employment status as they go along. But also, you're addressing pension liabilities for their pensions. So, that's I think across the board, employee groups feel supportive of what your decisions are when you do this, 115 trust approach.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, Kevin and Stuart, thank you so much. Please don't go away. I want to make sure that we bring your thoughts back into the process. City of Sausalito, when I was the CFO there, was the first city in the nation to adopt a Section 115 trust. We adopted a whole pension funding policy. And I want to talk a little bit about the policy development, what we went through. I was a little bit more methodical in thinking about this problem, and thought I was always on the forefront of pension reform. And I wanted to bring back a clear and concise policy for the city council to consider. So I began with problem identification. I wanted to just look at this problem. I wanted to collect, summarize, interpret information relevant to our specific pension situation. I was experiencing volatility and uncertainty in how much my pension costs were going to go up every year. How can I go about developing a long-term financial plan when I don't have control over a major cost item like our pension costs? So I've tried to frame this problem in a way that led to a policy solution rather than an ad hoc, how are we going to balance the budget next year? So that went into completely rethinking myself as an accountant and learning everything I could as an actuary. Boy, was that difficult, becoming an actuary. But, I wanted to be able to address all of the problems and all of the issues from both a quantitative and a qualitative perspective in order to put together an efficient, effective, and a feasible option. So what I'm basically saying is research, identify policy options. And then when I did that, I went through with strategy and policy development, where I started to engage my stakeholders, my city council finance committee, and discussions about how are we going to move this forward. Software like GovInvest pension modeling was inspirational for me to come up with different policies and different funding methodologies on how to stabilize my general fund costs. And finally, because of these overarching domains of stakeholder engagement and education, by like you said earlier, Kevin and Stuart, having a relationship with the council, I was always evaluating and giving feedback to the council on prior policy decisions. So as we were going through this situation, I had developed a huge level of trust, and finally brought that to them for enactment, which I did in a series of stages. And so basically what I was trying to do was stabilize my general fund. And what I said is, what's our funding target? What's the desired timeline to achieve that target? These were questions that were going through my mind. Well, everyone presumably wants 100%, but what's a balanced and thoughtful strategy to get there? And then should the policy be evergreen? In other words, should we be revisiting it on a more than annual basis, so that if triggers are met, or if there's action is required, or if there's certain parameters, then we can ease off on the policy. How much accountability do we want to build into it? And of course, what can the city afford? And in other words, what I was asking my city council to do was, let's consider a funding policy where we're going to decide today what programs we're going to crowd out, or what revenues do we need to raise today in order to have a funding policy going forward. In other words, a stabilized general fund. And then based on those answers, what payment options and tools best aligned. So using software, we were able to model a scenario that assumed the actuarial assumptions, not assumptions, but the actual experience that Sausalito was in workforce growth. And then we modeled rates of return. And we ended up with saying, here's what the general fund can afford. And it was a higher amount than the CalPERS additional, the annual required contribution would be. And so, and when we decided to fund that, we said, what are we going to do with the difference, the marginal difference between the required contribution and what we were charging the general fund? And that's what inspired the idea of putting that marginal difference into a Section 115 trust in order to build it year after year after year in order to act as a hedge fund against CalPERS gains and losses. And I'd be happy to send you everyone in the audience a staff report on how we went through. But what's more exciting is more and more cities are doing that. To answer another question that came from the audience, here's an example that came from the city of Palo Alto, where they're recommended these pension funding elements, where you start with setting a funding goal and then a time frame. You can say, what components can we use in order to reach those goals? Were allowable uses of funding, service delivery outcomes, and fiscal impacts. And they were able to put it in a grid and present this grid to the city council that said, well, here's our current practice. But if you want to move towards, in other words, a policy decision of a target of 95% within this corridor and do that within 10 years, then we might have to do additional cost sharing with our employees, or have to maybe identify funding for pension obligation bonds, a fresh start maybe on the UAL payment. So as they went through this, then they were able to clearly articulate for the community, for the council, what the fiscal impacts of those policy decisions would be and decide whether or not they wanted to afford it or not. So jumping ahead is a process. And what we would like to recommend is this is a process for you to use. Or if you're a GovInvest customer, we can help you through this process. And that's first is you have to have the right tools. So leverage your pension modeling software, whether it's GovInvest or Excel spreadsheets. You got to use these tools to start modeling scenarios and drafting different funding policies. And once you start drafting and thinking through the different funding policies along the way, there has to be collaboration with the key stakeholders, culminating in a city council workshop to present the scenario options and a draft policy, hopefully, which is eventually adopted and then implemented. So I think we saw some chats come in. Let's see if we have any questions from the audience real quick. Okay, so nothing really easy. So I'd like to get some of the audience participation. As a result of what you've heard so far today, let us know what you would like. If you would like, and you can choose as many as you want. Your options aren't limited. Do you want a copy of this presentation? Do you want help with developing a pension funding policy? If you want to learn more about Section 115 trusts, and if you've done any follow-up calls to either explore or to use your pension modeling software more, we're happy to help you with that as well. Kevin, while we're waiting for these answers to come in, do you want to address the question about who can help setting up a Section 115 trust?
I would suggest that they could contact us, contact me. PARS, the company that I work with, provides 115 trust both for pension and OPEB, and we'd be more than glad to have the conversation with whomever about that opportunity with them. So is that what you're looking for, Charlie?
It certainly is. Yeah, I think that answered Cordula's question about who is assisting with setting up a pension 115 trust. And of course, Max or I can talk to you more about what those are. Let's see, other questions. Speaking of early retirement incentives, is there a feature in GovInvest to model net present cost of such ERI plans? Max, I'll let you answer that.
Yes. So part of that can be done in the software, and part of that our team can assist with. And I'm always happy to schedule meetings to walk through that.
All right. And the follow-up question from Danielle to everyone was, should cities hire actuaries to analyze instead of GovInvest? Danielle, it'd be helpful if I knew what state you were from. But the GovInvest software is like an actuary in your pocket. It allows you, and this is the problem I was facing when I was a CFO, is I had all kinds of questions and I wanted to model different scenarios. But every time I called my actuary, he said, "Oh, that'll take 2 weeks. And by the way, an extra $5,000." So it was, when I found software like that GovInvest has, it was like having this actuary in my pocket to do that. Now, you're always going to need your actuary to analyze your pension fund if you have a standalone pension. The CalPERS actuaries are there telling you what your annual required contribution and your unfunded accrued actuarial liability is. If you want to bring an actuary to the council chambers to help explain, that can always be arranged. But I think the power of GovInvest is the actuary in your pocket, the ability to model out scenarios and use those scenarios to have data-driven evidence to support your policies. Another question came in from my friend Dorian Nunes in New Orleans. What ideas are there to get more funds to fund underfunded plans? Well, I have a great idea. I'd be happy to show it, talked about. It's called income from assets. And I think maybe we should make that the subject of another webinar, Dorian. I'm happy to talk to you more about that. And are there any other questions? Is Section 115 only for California? No, it's not. It can be deployed and is being deployed and used all over the United States. It's a fantastic tool. And
Charlie, there was this one question that you talked about that was interesting to me.
Okay.
Which was talking about crowding out current services to fund your unfunded liability in pensions. I think the other conversation to have with council is to show them what the unfunded liability is going to do to future services. That if you don't fund it now, you're going to be crowding out services in the future. And do you want, as a council and as a community today, do you want to be the council that set up the community for failure 20 years from now? It's kind of the conversation that kind of has to happen at this point in time.
Yeah.
I don't know what you think about that, Kevin, as far as like a conversation.
Kevin?
I'm sorry.
Well, the conversation is like when we talk about crowding out services today to pay for unfunded liability.
Yes.
The real answer is if we don't pay for the unfunded liability today, we're going to be crowding out services in the future. And should that be part of the discussion?
I think it's I've always seen in meeting with potential clients as we're talking about the positives of this program of the 115 Trust is the concept of getting ahead of the curve, being able to show the council the downstream effects by not acting versus acting, which is going to be in their benefit. Yep.
Right. Not acting today is going to cause a bigger problem for you tomorrow.
Absolutely.
I think that's the conversation to have with council today is to when they say, but we're not going to be able to provide this service today. And the answer is, in the future, you're not going to be able to provide that service and 2 other services because you didn't deal with it today.
The bigger issue is, you need to provide it, and if you don't provide it today, will you be able to provide it tomorrow? So we have a lot of agencies that have to have that conversation, and we try to guide them through that process.
Okay, we have about 1 minute left in the webinar. I guess we have a follow-up question. Stuart, what is your opinion on using pension obligation bonds?
We did it years ago before most people were thinking about it. We thought it was a good idea because we were paying less on our interest rate for the pension obligation bond versus the what we were paying into PERS, especially when it was 8.25%. So it was a lot easier to make the decision at 8.25% versus like 4% pension obligation bond. The challenge is when you invest, when you take your pension obligation bond and when you put that in the market, and that creates more hesitancy now as there's more market uncertainty. Because if you invest in a down market, you've created a bigger unfunded liability than you had when you started. So I'm kind of a 50-50 person at the moment, only because I can see the downside to it on the short term. And it's hard to explain to council how your down money next year to when, it's like, oh, we owe more money now than we would have before.
It's definitely a risk-based arbitrage play. And
It is a risk-based arbitrage play.
yeah,
I think the better answer, well, not the better answer, but an answer to that is those cities that are able to confidently do 5 and 10-year budget projections, can hopefully show a path about whether that's a good or a bad decision. Like Stuart, to me, it's a flip of the coin about whether it's a good one or a bad one, depending upon what's happening in the markets and what's happening in your city. So.
All right. Well, let me thank both Kevin and Stuart. You guys were wonderful. We really appreciate you being on the webinar today. I enjoyed being your talk show host. And men and women attending the webinar, thank you so much for being on the webinar with us today and staying with us all the way to the end. Again, final slide here is our contact information. I'll leave this up, but we're going to close the webinar. And please feel comfortable reaching out to any or all of us for any follow-up information that you might have. So goodbye and thank you. And please chat any closing comments that you might have to us. Thank you and goodbye.